I'd been gone 8 months helping my daughter with her newborn in Portland. I came back to my cabin on Lake Whitmore in July 2024. Everything looked the same. The forest, the mountains, the 800-acre lake. Except for the buildings on the eastern shore. Cabins, dozens of them. Maybe more than 100. Modern design, large windows, wraparound decks, paved parking, a welcome center. I drove around the lake, counted as I went. 109 cabins, cedar siding, metal roofs, high-end vacation rentals. A sign read, Mountain Vista Lakefront Rentals, Luxury Cabin Getaways, $400 to $600 per night. On my land. The HOA president, Garrett Pemberton, had built a $12 million resort on my property while I was gone. When I confronted him, he refused to remove it, said they'd been operating for 2 years, threatened litigation. Garrett made one critical mistake. Lake Whitmore exists because my grandfather built a dam in 1962. I own that dam. If I open the gates, the lake drains in 6 weeks. I opened them the next morning. By the time Garrett realized his lakefront cabins were sitting in a muddy creek bed with no water, it was too late to undo what came next. Before we dive in, comment below where you're tuning in from, and make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. I'd been gone 8 months, November 2023 through July 2024. My daughter Emma had her first baby in Portland, and she needed help. Her husband deployed overseas, and she was alone with a newborn. So I closed up my cabin on the north shore of Lake Whitmore, drained the pipes, locked the doors, and drove to Oregon. 8 months of being a grandfather, changing diapers, making bottles, helping Emma adjust to motherhood. It was good, necessary. But by July, Emma had found her rhythm. Her husband was back, and I was ready to come home. I drove back to Colorado on July 18th, 2024. Pulled up to my cabin around 4 p.m. Everything looked the same. The forest, the mountains, the lake stretching out 800 acres in front of me. Except something was different on the eastern shore. Buildings, lots of them. I stood on my deck with binoculars, scanning the far side of the lake. Cabins, dozens of them, maybe more than 100. Modern design, large windows, wraparound decks. They line the entire eastern shoreline, evenly spaced, professionally landscaped. There was a paved parking area, a welcome center with a large sign I couldn't quite read from this distance, a dock system with what looked like 40 boat slips, and people, families unloading cars, kids running toward the water, couples sitting on cabin decks with wine glasses. I lowered the binoculars and stood there for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had built a resort on my lake. I grabbed my truck keys and drove around the lake on the perimeter road, a rough dirt track that circled my entire 2,400-acre property. It took 20 minutes to reach the eastern shore. The cabins were even more impressive up close, 109 of them. I counted as I drove slowly past. Each one was roughly 800 square feet, cedar siding, metal roofs, large windows facing the lake, decks with furniture, modern fixtures. They weren't cheap construction. These were high-end vacation rentals. At the center of the development was a welcome center, a larger building with an office, bathrooms, and a covered pavilion. The sign out front read, Mountain Vista Lakefront Rentals, Luxury Cabin Getaways, $400 to $600 per night. I parked my truck and walked to the welcome center. A woman in her 30s sat at the front desk, typing on a laptop. She looked up and smiled. Hi, are you checking in? What's your name? I'm not checking in. I'm James Whitmore. I own this lake. Her smile faltered. Oh, I'm sorry. I think there's been some confusion. These cabins are part of Mountain Vista Estates HOA. This is our lakefront amenity. This lake is on my property, all 800 acres, and those cabins are built on my land. She looked genuinely confused. I don't think that's right. The HOA president, Mr. Pemberton, he said this was county land along a public waterway. We've been operating here for 2 years. 2 years? Yes. The cabins were built in 2022 and 2023. We opened for rentals in summer 2023. We're fully booked through September. I looked past her at the wall behind the desk. There was a map showing all 109 cabins, a pricing sheet, and a promotional poster. Escape to Lake Whitmore, Colorado's hidden gem. My lake, my name, their business. Who do I talk to about this? Mr. Pemberton? Yes, Garrett Pemberton. He's the HOA president. His office is at the Mountain Vista Estates clubhouse, about 2 miles east of here. I thanked her and walked back to my truck. As I drove away, I passed families grilling on cabin decks, kids playing in the lake, couples kayaking, all of it happening on my property. I called my attorney, David Chen, from the truck. David, I need you to come to the lake. Now. James, you're back? How's Emma? She's fine. The baby's fine. But someone built 109 vacation cabins on my property while I was gone. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, what? 109 cabins, a full resort operation. They've been renting them out for a year. I need you to bring the property survey and the deed to the dam. I need to know exactly where my property lines are. I'll be there in 2 hours. I drove back to my cabin and pulled out my own copies of the property documents. The deed was clear. I owned 2,400 acres, including the entire lake and the dam at the southern end. My grandfather, Robert Whitmore, had bought the land in 1958. Back then it was just a creek valley, 3 mountain streams converging in a low basin. In 1962, he built a dam, 60 feet high, concrete and steel, engineered to last a century. The dam backed up the water from the 3 creeks, creating an 800-acre lake, Lake Whitmore. My grandfather had used it for fishing and peace. When he died in 2004, my father inherited it. When my father died in 2008, I inherited it. For 16 years I'd lived on this lake, paid property taxes, $48,000 a year, maintained the dam, kept it stocked with fish, enjoyed the solitude. I'd never allowed commercial development, never allowed public access. It was private property, my property. And now someone had built a $12 million resort on it. David arrived at 6 p.m. with a rolling case full of documents. We spread the property survey across my kitchen table. The survey was from 2009, updated when I inherited the property. It showed clear boundary lines. My property extended 200 feet east of the lake shoreline on the eastern side. That's where the land rose into foothills and transitioned to the Mountain Vista Estates HOA development. David pulled up a satellite image on his laptop. Current imagery from Google Earth, dated May 2024. The 109 cabins were clearly visible. We overlaid the property survey onto the satellite image. Every single cabin was inside my property line, some by 20 feet, some by 80 feet. None of them were on HOA land. David sat back. James, this is textbook trespassing. They built 109 structures on your property without permission. You have every right to demand removal or sue for damages. I want to talk to whoever authorized this first. I want to know how they justified building on my land. The woman at the Welcome Center said it was the HOA president, Garrett Pemberton. Then let's go talk to Garrett Pemberton. We drove to the Mountain Vista Estates clubhouse. It was a sprawling facility. Pool, tennis courts, fitness center, event spaces. This was a wealthy community. Homes in the $800,000 to $2 million range. The HOA office was on the 2nd floor. A receptionist directed us to Garrett Pemberton's office. He was in his early 50s, tall, fit, expensive suit, confident handshake. Gentlemen, how can I help you? I sat down across from him. I'm James Whitmore. I own Lake Whitmore and the 2,400 acres around it. You built 109 cabins on my property. Garrett smiled. Not a friendly smile, a dismissive smile. Mr. Whitmore, I've heard your name. You're the guy who lives in the cabin on the North Shore. That's right. Well, I appreciate you stopping by, but I think there's been some confusion. The lake is a public waterway. The shoreline where we built the cabins is undeveloped county land. We checked the records before we started construction. David leaned forward. Mr. Pemberton, I'm David Chen, Mr. Whitmore's attorney. The lake exists because of a dam Mr. Whitmore's family built in 1962. The shoreline is part of his deeded property. We have surveys, tax records, and water rights documentation. Your cabins are built on his land. Garrett's smile didn't fade. We researched water rights extensively before this project. Lakes over 500 acres in Colorado are considered public recreational resources. The fact that Mr. Whitmore's grandfather built a dam doesn't grant him exclusive ownership of the water or the shoreline. I kept my voice calm. The lake exists because of my dam. Without the dam, this area is a shallow creek valley. The water is here because I maintain the dam and keep the gates closed. And the land where your cabins are built is deeded to me. I pay property taxes on it. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Mr. Whitmore, we spent $12 million building those cabins. We have county construction permits. We've been operating legally for 2 years. We generate $8 million a year in revenue. This is a significant investment, and we're not going to tear it down because you showed up with a survey. David's voice sharpened. Mr. Pemberton, your investment doesn't change the fact that you're trespassing. My client owns the land. Your cabins need to be removed. Garrett laughed, a short, sharp laugh. Removed? We're not removing anything. We've been operating here for 2 years. That establishes adverse possession. The cabins stay. I looked at him. Adverse possession in Colorado requires 18 years of continuous, open, and notorious use. You've been here 2 years. You don't have a claim. Garrett's smile finally faded. Then we'll litigate. We have deep pockets, Mr. Whitmore. The HOA has 240 homeowners paying dues. We have resources. If you want to fight this, we'll fight. David started to respond, but I put a hand on his arm. Mr. Pemberton, you've made your position clear. We'll be in touch. We left the office. In the parking lot, David turned to me. James, he's not going to negotiate. He's invested $12 million. He thinks he can bully you into accepting it, or drag you through years of litigation. I know. So what do you want to do? We can file an injunction, demand immediate removal, and sue for trespassing damages. It'll be expensive and take time, but you'll win. I looked east, toward the lake. I need to think about this. Think about what? You have a clear legal case. I know, but legal cases take years. And Garrett's right, the HOA has resources. They'll drag this out as long as possible while they keep making money off my land. So what's the alternative? I didn't answer. That night I sat on my deck and thought about the dam. I'd grown up around that dam. My grandfather had taught me how it worked, the control house, the gate mechanisms, the water flow calculations. When I became a civil engineer, I specialized in dam design and water management. I'd worked on projects across the western U.S. for 35 years. I knew dams. I knew water systems. I knew exactly how Lake Whitmore functioned. The lake existed because the dam gates were closed. Water from 3 mountain creeks backed up behind the 60-foot dam, filling the basin and creating 800 acres of lake. If I opened the gates, the water would drain. In 4 to 6 weeks, the lake would be mostly empty, just shallow creek beds running through a muddy valley. The 109 cabins would be sitting 15 to 20 feet above the water line. No lake, no lakefront, no business. I called Martin Cross, a colleague from my engineering days. He'd worked on the Whitmore Dam maintenance inspection in 2019. Martin, it's James Whitmore. James, how are you? How's the lake? It's crowded. Someone built 109 cabins on my property while I was visiting my daughter. What? That's insane. Yeah, I need your technical opinion. If I open the dam gates fully, how long would it take to drain the lake? There was a pause. You're thinking about draining Lake Whitmore? Hypothetically. Well, hypothetically, in midsummer with all 3 creeks at normal flow, full gate opening would drain about 80% of the lake in 4 to 6 weeks. You'd be left with the creek beds and some shallow pools. Why? The cabins are built on what they think is lakefront property. If I remove the lake, they're sitting in a muddy valley. Martin laughed. That's brilliant. Harsh, but brilliant. Structurally, there's no problem. The dam was designed with full drainage capacity for maintenance and inspection. You have every legal right to drain for dam maintenance. It's your dam. What if I kept it drained for an extended period? How extended? 12 to 18 months. Still no structural issues, and legally, as long as you're not violating downstream water rights, which you're not, because the creeks still flow through the dam, you can operate it however you want. It's private property. Thanks, Martin. James, are you seriously going to drain the lake? I'm considering all my options. I hung up and walked down to the dam. It was a 10-minute walk from my cabin, down a steep trail to the southern end of the lake. The dam was beautiful in the evening light, 60 feet of concrete rising from the creek valley, spillways on both sides. The control house at the center, a small building housing the gate mechanisms. I unlocked the control house and stepped inside. The main gate wheel was in the center of the room, a large steel wheel connected to gears and cables that controlled the 3 main gates at the base of the dam. I'd operated this wheel dozens of times over the years, adjusting water levels, managing spring runoff, conducting maintenance. I put my hand on the wheel and thought about Garrett Pemberton. He'd built 109 cabins on my land. He'd dismissed my ownership. He'd threatened to litigate and drag me through years of court battles. He thought he was untouchable because he'd invested $12 million and had 240 homeowners backing him. But Garrett had made one critical mistake. He'd built his entire business on a lake that existed because I chose to keep the dam gates closed. I could remove his lakefront anytime I wanted. I pulled out my phone and called David. David, I've made a decision. I'm not going to sue. Not yet. What are you going to do? I'm going to drain the lake. There was a long pause. James, you're serious? Completely. The dam is my property. I have the right to drain it for maintenance and inspection. I'm going to open the gates tomorrow morning. In 6 weeks, Garrett's lakefront cabins will be sitting in a creek bed. That's aggressive. He built on my land. He refused to remove the cabins. He threatened to tie me up in litigation for years while he profits off my property. I'm removing the property he built on. David laughed. I have to admit, it's effective and completely legal. When are you doing it? Tomorrow, August 1st. I'll document everything. I'll notify the county that I'm conducting dam maintenance, and I'll let nature handle the rest. Garrett's going to lose his mind. Good. He should have thought about that before he built 109 cabins on my land. I stood in the control house for another hour, looking at the gate wheel. Tomorrow morning, I'd open the gates. The lake would start draining, and Garrett Pemberton's $12 million investment would become worthless. He thought the lake was public property. He was about to learn that lakes don't exist on their own. They exist because someone builds a dam, and I own the dam. I opened the dam gates at 6 a.m. on August 1st, 2024. The control house was cool and quiet in the early morning light. I turned the main gate wheel counterclockwise, feeling the resistance of the gears and cables engaging. The wheel turned slowly. 1 rotation, 2, 3. I kept turning until the indicator showed the gates were fully open. Maximum drainage position. Through the control house window, I could see the water starting to flow through the spillways at the base of the dam. Not a dramatic rush, more like opening a bathtub drain. Steady, continuous, unstoppable. I locked the gate wheel in position, photographed the settings, and documented everything with my phone. Then I called the Douglas County Water Management Office. This is James Whitmore. I'm calling to notify you that I'm conducting maintenance on Whitmore Dam. The gates will be fully open for an extended drainage period, approximately 12 to 18 months, while I conduct structural inspections. The clerk on the phone sounded bored. Do you need an inspection permit? No, this is routine maintenance on private property. I'm just notifying you as a courtesy in case downstream users notice increased flow in Platte Creek. Okay, I'll make a note in the system. Thanks for calling. That was it. No objections, no questions. Because it was my dam, my property, my decision. I walked back to my cabin and made coffee. Then I sat on my deck and watched the lake. At first, nothing looked different. The water level change was too subtle to notice from a distance, but I knew what was happening. Every hour, thousands of gallons were flowing out through the dam gates. The lake level was dropping 6 inches per day. In a week, it would be noticeable. In a month, it would be dramatic. For the first 3 days, everything was quiet. Guests continued checking in at the Mountain Vista lakefront rentals. Families swam. Boats launched from the docks. Kayakers paddled along the shoreline. Nobody noticed the water level dropping. On day 4, I drove around to the eastern shore to check on the cabins. The docks were starting to show it. What had been floating boat slips now had visible gaps between the dock platforms and the waterline. Maybe a foot, not dramatic yet, but noticeable if you were paying attention. I parked at the Welcome Center and walked along the shoreline. A man in his 60s was standing on one of the docks, looking confused. "Excuse me," he called out to me. "Do you work here?" "No, just a local." The water level seems lower than when we checked in 3 days ago. Is that normal? Lakes fluctuate. Drought conditions. Happens every summer. He nodded, not entirely convinced, and walked back to his cabin. By day 7, August 8th, the change was undeniable. The docks were 3 feet above the waterline. Boats couldn't launch. The beach area had expanded by 20 feet, exposing rocks and mud. I drove past the welcome center and saw guests gathered outside, talking to the woman at the front desk. Why is the lake draining? Is this temporary? We paid $500 a night for lakefront access. There's no lake. The woman looked overwhelmed. I don't know what's happening. I've contacted the HOA. They're looking into it. I didn't stop. I drove back to my cabin and waited. That afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. This is James. Mr. Whitmore, this is Garrett Pemberton. We need to talk. The lake is draining. I'm aware. What do you know about this? Is there a leak in the dam? No leak. I opened the gates. Dam maintenance. There was a long silence. You opened the gates? You're draining the lake? That's correct. I'm conducting a full structural inspection of the dam. It requires complete drainage. The process will take 12 to 18 months. 12 to 18 months? Are you insane? We have 109 cabins that depend on that lake. We're fully booked through September. You're destroying our business. Your business is built on my property without my permission. That's trespassing. Remove the cabins, and I'll consider refilling the lake after the inspection is complete. You can't do this. This is sabotage. I'm calling my attorney. You'll be hearing from us. Mr. Pemberton, I'm conducting routine maintenance on my private dam, on my private property. I notified the county. Everything is legal. You can sue if you want. But while you're suing, your cabins will be sitting in a creek bed with no water. I hung up. By day 14, August 15th, the lake level had dropped 8 feet. The shoreline had receded 50 to 100 feet, depending on the slope of the land. The docks were completely high and dry, sitting on exposed lakebed. The boat ramps led to mud flats. The beach areas were unrecognizable. What had been swimming zones were now expanses of rocks, weeds, and drying mud. I drove around the lake again. The 109 cabins were still standing, but the lakefront was gone. Guests would have to walk 100 feet across muddy ground just to reach the water. And the water that remained was shrinking every day. There were no guests. The parking lot at the Welcome Center was empty. Cabins that had been fully booked were dark. A sign on the Welcome Center door read, "Temporarily closed for maintenance." I took photos, documented everything. On August 18th, Garrett showed up at my cabin. I saw his truck coming up the access road, a black Range Rover, speeding, kicking up dust. He parked in front of my cabin and got out, face red, furious. I was sitting on my deck with a cup of coffee. "What did you do?" Garrett shouted, walking toward me. "I told you, dam maintenance. This isn't maintenance. You're weaponizing your dam to destroy our business." I stayed calm. "I'm exercising my legal right to drain my lake for structural inspection. The fact that you built 109 cabins on my property and marketed them as lakefront is your problem, not mine. We've lost $400,000 in bookings. Guests are demanding refunds. Cabin owners are threatening to sue us. You're deliberately sabotaging us. I warned you. I told you the cabins were on my property. You refused to remove them. You threatened to litigate. So I'm removing the lake instead." Garrett's fists clenched. "You can't keep the lake drained forever." "Actually, I can. It's my dam, my property. I can operate it however I want, as long as I'm not violating downstream water rights. And I'm not. The creeks still flow through the spillways. This is economic warfare. No, this is property rights. You trespassed. You built on my land. You refused to leave. So I'm making your investment worthless." Garrett stared at me, breathing hard. "I'm suing you. My attorney is drafting a complaint right now. We're seeking an injunction to force you to refill the lake and $40 million in damages. Go ahead, but while you're suing me, your cabins are sitting in a creek valley with no lake. How much revenue are you losing per day? $20,000? $30,000? His jaw tightened. "You think you're clever. You think you can force us to abandon a $12 million investment. I don't think anything. I know. You have 2 options. Remove the cabins and we negotiate a settlement, or keep them there and watch them become worthless as the lake disappears. We're not removing anything. Then enjoy the creek bed. Garrett turned and walked back to his truck. He slammed the door and drove away, tires spinning in the gravel. I sat on my deck and watched the lake continue to drain. By the end of August, 4 weeks after I'd opened the gates, the lake was barely recognizable. The water level had dropped 20 feet. The 800-acre lake was now maybe 200 acres of shallow pools, connected by creek channels. The eastern shore, where the 109 cabins sat, was completely dry, just mud, rocks, and the 3 creek beds winding through the valley. The cabins were 15 to 20 feet above the nearest water. No boats, no swimming, no fishing, no lakefront. Just 109 expensive cabins sitting in a dried-up lake bed. I took my drone up and captured aerial footage. It was dramatic. The cabins, perfectly arranged in rows, surrounded by nothing but mud and empty shoreline. The docks sitting on dry ground, boat ramps leading to nothing. A $12 million ghost town. On September 3rd, David called me. "James, Garrett's attorney filed the lawsuit. They're seeking an injunction to force you to close the dam gates and refill the lake. They're also suing for $40 million in damages, lost revenue, property devaluation, and emotional distress." Emotional distress? Apparently the cabin owners are very upset. What's the timeline? Injunction hearing is scheduled for September 20th. Judge will hear arguments and decide whether to force you to refill the lake while the main case proceeds. Can they win? Not a chance. You own the dam. You have the right to conduct maintenance. Their cabins are built on your property without permission. The judge isn't going to force you to refill the lake to support their illegal business. Good. But James, Garrett's going to fight this hard. He's hired Westfield and Associates, big firm, expensive lawyers. They're going to argue that you're acting in bad faith, that this isn't really maintenance, that you're weaponizing the dam. Let them argue. The evidence is clear. They trespassed. I'm operating my dam. End of story. David paused. You know this is going to get ugly, right? Media coverage, public pressure, accusations. Garrett's going to paint you as the villain who drained a lake out of spite. I don't care about public opinion. I care about property rights. Just be prepared. I hung up and looked at the lake, or what was left of it. Garrett thought he could bully me with lawsuits and public pressure, but I'd spent 35 years as a civil engineer. I understood water systems, I understood dams, and I understood that Lake Whitmore existed because I chose to let it exist. Garrett had built his fortune on my property. Now he was learning that fortunes built on someone else's land can disappear just as quickly as they appeared. The lake was draining, and there was nothing Garrett could do to stop it. 6 weeks after I opened the dam gates, Lake Whitmore was gone. Not completely. There were still shallow pools where the 3 creeks converged, maybe 50 acres of water scattered across the valley floor. But the 800-acre lake that had existed for 62 years was reduced to creek beds, mud flats, and exposed lake bed. The transformation was dramatic. I flew my drone over the eastern shore on September 12th to document the full extent. The 109 cabins sat in perfect rows, 15 to 20 feet above the nearest water. The ground around them was dried mud, cracked and pale in the late summer sun. Weeds were already starting to grow through the exposed lake bed. The docks were grounded, sitting on hard earth. The boat ramps led to nothing. The beach areas were just rocks and dirt. It looked post-apocalyptic, like someone had pulled a plug and drained an entire ecosystem overnight, which, essentially, I had. The cabins themselves were intact, structurally sound, well-built, modern. But without the lake, they were worthless. Nobody wants to rent a lakefront cabin that sits in a dried-up creek valley. The Mountain Vista lakefront rentals operation had collapsed completely. The welcome center was closed. No staff, no guests, just a locked door and a handwritten sign, closed until further notice. The parking lot was empty except for one vehicle, a contractor's truck. I watched through binoculars as 2 men walked between the cabins, taking photos and making notes, probably hired by Garrett to assess the damage. The financial impact on the HOA was catastrophic. Before I drained the lake, the cabins generated approximately $8 million per year in rental revenue. The HOA took a 30% management fee, $2.4 million annually. The remaining 70% went to the individual cabin owners who'd purchased them as investment properties. In 6 weeks, that revenue had dropped to zero. Every booking for September, October, and beyond had been canceled. Guests demanded refunds. Review sites were flooded with angry posts. We paid $500 per night for a lakefront cabin. There is no lake, just mud. Avoid at all costs. False advertising. The lake is completely drained. Cabins are sitting in a dried-up wasteland. Demand a refund. Mountain Vista Lakefront Rentals is a scam. The lake disappeared, and they still tried to charge us. But the real fury came from the cabin owners. There were 109 cabins. Each had been sold to individual investors for $180,000 to $220,000 as turnkey vacation rental properties. Total investment from cabin owners, approximately $21 million. They'd been promised 15 to 20% annual returns through rental income, professional management, a guaranteed revenue stream from one of Colorado's hidden gem lakes. Now their investments were sitting in mud. I learned about the cabin owners' fury through David, who'd been monitoring the Mountain Vista HOA's internal communications. James, the cabin owners are going nuclear. They're threatening to sue the HOA for fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of contract. Some of them are demanding full refunds, $180,000 to $220,000 each. If even half of them sue, that's $10 million in potential liability for the HOA. And the HOA's response? Garrett's telling them it's your fault, that you're sabotaging the business, that they're suing you for $40 million, and once they win, everything will be fine. Except they won't win. Correct, but Garrett's trying to buy time. He's telling cabin owners to hold on, that the lake will be refilled soon, that this is temporary. It's not temporary. The lake stays drained until the cabins are removed. David paused. James, some of these cabin owners are going to lose everything, their entire investments, life savings in some cases. That's not my problem. They bought property that was built illegally on someone else's land. They should have done due diligence. I know, but it's going to get messy. It did. On September 15th, a group of 20 cabin owners showed up at my property. I was working in my shed when I heard vehicles coming up the access road. Multiple trucks and SUVs, parking in a line near my cabin. I walked out to meet them. They were angry. A mix of ages, some in their 30s, some in their 60s. All of them had invested in the cabins. All of them had lost money. A man in his 40s stepped forward. His face was red, his voice shaking with rage. Are you James Whitmore? I am. You destroyed our investments. We put our money into those cabins and you drained the lake. You ruined us. I stayed calm. I drained my lake on my property. Your cabins are built on my land without my permission. That's not my fault. We paid $200,000 for our cabin. We were told it was legal. We were told the lake was public property. You were lied to. The lake is private. The land is private. Whoever sold you that cabin committed fraud. But it wasn't me. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We used our retirement savings. This was supposed to be our income. Now it's worth nothing. I'm sorry you were misled, but I didn't build on your property. You built on mine. The first man's fists clenched. You could refill the lake. You're choosing not to. You're doing this to hurt us. I'm doing this to protect my property rights. The cabins are trespassing. Remove them, and I'll consider refilling the lake. We can't remove them. We don't own the land. The HOA controls everything. Then talk to the HOA. They're the ones who built on my land. Another man, younger, stepped forward. This is bullshit. You're hiding behind property rights while destroying people's lives. You're a selfish bastard. I looked at him. I've owned this property for 16 years. I've paid $48,000 a year in taxes. I've maintained the dam. I've kept the lake pristine. And while I was gone taking care of my daughter and her newborn, your HOA built 109 cabins on my land without asking, without permission, without compensation. And now you're angry at me for defending my property? The group went quiet. Your fight isn't with me, I continued. It's with Garrett Pemberton and the HOA board who told you this was legal. They lied. They committed fraud. And now you're paying the price. I'm sorry for that. but I'm not refilling the lake until the cabins are gone." The woman who'd mentioned her retirement savings started crying. A few others walked back to their vehicles, shaking their heads. The first man stared at me for a long moment. "You'll regret this." "Maybe, but it's still my property." They left. That evening, David called. "James, the cabin owners are organizing. They're talking about filing a class action lawsuit against the HOA for fraud and misrepresentation." "Good. They should. Some of them are also talking about suing you." "On what grounds?" "Tortious interference with business relationships. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. They'll argue you're deliberately destroying their investments out of spite." "Let them sue. They built on my property. I'm operating my dam. It's legal." "I know. But it's going to be expensive to defend even if you win." "I don't care. I'm not backing down." On September 20th, the injunction hearing took place at Douglas County District Court. Garrett's attorneys, 3 lawyers from Westfield and Associates, argued that I was acting in bad faith, that the dam maintenance was a pretext, and that I should be ordered to refill the lake immediately to prevent further economic harm. David argued that I owned the dam, had the legal right to conduct maintenance, and that the HOA's cabins were built illegally on my property. Judge Margaret Carlson listened to both sides for 2 hours. Then she issued her ruling. Mr. Whitmore owns the dam and the surrounding property. He has the legal right to operate the dam as he sees fit for maintenance purposes. The fact that the plaintiff built vacation cabins on Mr. Whitmore's property without permission does not create an obligation for Mr. Whitmore to maintain a specific water level to support the plaintiff's business. The injunction is denied. Garrett's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly acting in bad faith. This isn't maintenance, it's economic warfare." Judge Carlson looked at him. "Counselor, your client built 109 structures on someone else's property. That's trespassing. Mr. Whitmore is under no obligation to facilitate your client's trespass by maintaining a lake that benefits their illegal structures. If you want the lake refilled, remove the cabins from Mr. Whitmore's property." Injunction denied. The gavel came down. David and I walked out of the courthouse. "That was decisive," David said. "Good. Now Garrett knows he can't force me to refill the lake." "What's next?" "We file our countersuit, trespassing, demand for cabin removal, and $2.5 million in damages for 3 years of unauthorized commercial use of my property. I'll draft it today." The media picked up the story that week. Lake owner drains 800-acre lake to force HOA cabin removal. HOA's $12 million investment stranded after property owner opens dam gates. Colorado man weaponizes dam and property rights dispute. The coverage was mixed. Some outlets painted me as a vindictive property owner. Others focused on the HOA's illegal trespassing. I didn't give interviews. I didn't respond to reporters. I just let the facts speak for themselves. By October 1st, the situation had reached a breaking point. The cabins sat empty, surrounded by mud and dried lake bed. Garrett's $40 million lawsuit was moving forward, but slowly. My countersuit for $2.5 million in damages was filed. The cabin owner's class action lawsuit against the HOA was in preliminary stages, and the lake remained drained. Garrett had 2 choices: remove the cabins and negotiate, or keep fighting while his investment turned to dust. I sat on my deck every evening, looking at the empty valley where the lake used to be. It looked wrong, unnatural, like something vital had been removed. But it was temporary. Once the cabins were gone, I'd close the gates. The lake would refill. Nature would return. Until then, the creek beds would remain dry, and Garrett Pemberton's $12 million resort would sit in the mud. The injunction hearing on September 20th had been just the beginning. Judge Carlson's denial of Garrett's request to force me to refill the lake was a clear victory, but it didn't end the legal battle. It intensified it. Garrett's lawsuit for $40 million in damages was still active. My countersuit for $2.5 million in trespassing damages was moving forward, and the cabin owner's class action lawsuit against the HOA was gaining momentum. By October, there were 3 separate legal battles happening simultaneously, and I was at the center of all of them. David and I spent the next month preparing for the main trial, Garrett's $40 million lawsuit, claiming I'd destroyed his business through malicious interference and bad faith operation of the dam. His legal theory was creative, I had to admit. Westfield and Associates argued that while I technically owned the dam and had the right to conduct maintenance, I was using that right as a weapon rather than for legitimate purposes. They claimed the drainage wasn't really about dam inspection. It was about economic retaliation. The defendant has operated this dam for 16 years without issue, their complaint read. He conducted routine inspections in 2015, 2019, and 2022, none of which required full drainage. The sudden decision to drain the lake for 12 to 18 months immediately after discovering the plaintiff's cabin development demonstrates clear retaliatory intent. It was a smart argument, but it had one fatal flaw. The cabins were built on my property without permission. David's response brief was devastating. The plaintiff built 109 commercial structures on the defendant's property without authorization, without compensation, and without legal right. The plaintiff then refused to remove these structures when confronted, instead claiming adverse possession and threatening protracted litigation. The defendant's decision to drain his privately owned lake, created and maintained by his privately owned dam, is a lawful exercise of property rights. The plaintiff has no legal standing to demand that the defendant maintain specific water levels to support the plaintiff's illegal commercial operation. The trial was scheduled for November 18, 2024. It lasted 4 days. Garrett's attorneys called 8 witnesses. First was Garrett himself. He testified about the cabin development, the research, the planning, the $12 million investment. "We spent 2 years researching water rights and property boundaries," Garrett said from the witness stand. "Every expert we consulted told us that lakes over 500 acres in Colorado are public waterways. We believed we were building on public land, adjacent to a public lake. We acted in good faith." David cross-examined him. "Mr. Pemberton, did you ever contact James Whitmore before building the cabins?" "No." "Did you ever ask his permission to build on the land adjacent to the lake?" "We didn't think we needed permission. The land appeared to be unused county property." "Did you conduct a title search on the land where you built the cabins?" Garrett hesitated. "We relied on county records." "That's not what I asked. Did you conduct a formal title search?" "No." "Did you hire a surveyor to verify the property boundaries?" "No, we used county GIS maps." "So you spent $12 million building 109 cabins without verifying who owned the land?" "We believed the research was sufficient." David pulled out a document. This is the Douglas County Property Survey for James Whitmore's land, dated 2009. It clearly shows his property extending 200 feet past the eastern shoreline, exactly where your cabins are built. This survey is publicly available. Did you review it before construction? I don't recall seeing that specific survey." "You don't recall? Or you didn't look?" Garrett's attorney objected. Asked and answered. Judge Carlson sustained it, but the damage was done. The next witness was an engineer Garrett had hired, a water rights specialist named Dr. Raymond Koch. Dr. Koch testified that Lake Whitmore, as an 800-acre body of water, should be classified as a public recreational resource under Colorado water law. David cross-examined him too. "Dr. Koch, is Lake Whitmore a natural lake?" "No, it's a reservoir created by a dam." "And who owns that dam?" "James Whitmore." "Does Colorado law require private dam owners to maintain their reservoirs at specific levels for public recreation?" "Not explicitly, but..." "Yes or no, Dr. Koch?" "No." "Does James Whitmore have the legal right to drain his reservoir for maintenance and inspection?" "Yes, but the duration..." "Yes or no?" "Yes." "Thank you." Garrett's attorneys also called 3 cabin owners who testified about their financial losses. One woman, Patricia Moreno, described investing her retirement savings, $195,000, into a cabin that was now worthless. "I trusted the HOA," she said, crying on the stand. "They told me it was a safe investment. They showed me projections. They promised 18% annual returns. Now I have nothing." It was heartbreaking. But David's cross-examination focused on the key issue. "Ms. Moreno, when you purchased the cabin, did the HOA provide you with a deed showing you owned the land beneath it?" I got a deed for the cabin structure, but not the land. The HOA said they controlled the land as part of the community property." "Did you hire an attorney to review the purchase documents?" No, I trusted the HOA. David didn't push further. The point was made. The cabin owners had failed to do due diligence. On day 3, I testified. Garrett's lead attorney, Marcus Westfield, questioned me for 2 hours. Mr. Whitmore, you've operated Whitmore Dam for 16 years. How many times have you drained the lake for maintenance? This is the first full drainage. Why now? Why not in 2015, 2019, or 2022 when you conducted previous inspections? Those were partial inspections. This is a comprehensive structural assessment. The dam is 62 years old. It requires thorough evaluation. Isn't it true that you decided to drain the lake only after discovering the cabins? The timing is coincidental. I'd been planning a full inspection. The cabins made it more urgent. More urgent how? Because I discovered 109 structures built on my property without permission. I needed to understand the full scope of the trespass and determine how to address it. So you drained the lake to force the HOA to remove the cabins. I drained the lake to conduct dam maintenance. The fact that it makes the cabins worthless is a side effect. A convenient side effect. A predictable side effect. If you build a business dependent on a privately owned lake, you're taking a risk that the lake owner might operate the dam differently. Westfield tried several more angles, suggesting I was acting out of spite, that the drainage was excessive, that I could have negotiated instead. But every argument came back to the same fundamental issue. The cabins were on my property without permission. David's direct examination of me was straightforward. Mr. Whitmore, do you own the land where the 109 cabins are built? Yes. Did you give permission for those cabins to be built? No. Did the HOA offer to compensate you for use of your land? No. Did you ask them to remove the cabins? Yes, they refused. Do you have the legal right to drain your lake for dam maintenance? Yes. Thank you. On day 4, both sides presented closing arguments. Marcus Westfield painted me as a vindictive property owner who'd weaponized the dam to destroy innocent people's investments. James Whitmore had options, Westfield said. He could have negotiated. He could have requested reasonable compensation. Instead, he chose the nuclear option, draining an entire lake to force compliance. This isn't about property rights, it's about revenge. David's closing was simple and devastating. The plaintiff built 109 structures on the defendant's property without permission. That's trespassing. The defendant owns a dam. He has the legal right to operate it for maintenance. Colorado law is clear. Property owners are not required to maintain their land in a way that benefits trespassers. The plaintiff made a $12 million bet that they could build on someone else's property and get away with it. They lost that bet. Now they want this court to force Mr. Whitmore to subsidize their illegal business by maintaining a specific water level. That's not how property law works. Judge Carlson took 2 weeks to issue her ruling. On December 3, 2024, the decision came down. The court finds in favor of the defendant, James Whitmore, on all counts. The written opinion was 32 pages. The key section read, "The plaintiff's cabins are built on property owned by the defendant without permission or legal right. This constitutes trespassing. The plaintiff's claim that the defendant is acting in bad faith by draining the lake is without merit. The defendant owns the dam. He has the legal authority to operate it for maintenance purposes. The fact that the defendant's lawful actions negatively impact the plaintiff's unlawful business does not create liability. The plaintiff cannot build a commercial enterprise on stolen land and then demand that the rightful owner maintain conditions favorable to that enterprise. Property rights are foundational to law. The defendant is entitled to protect his property by any lawful means, including operation of his dam. The plaintiff's request for $40 million in damages is denied. The defendant's countersuit for trespassing damages is granted. The plaintiff is ordered to remove all 109 cabins from the defendant's property within 120 days and pay the defendant $2.5 million in damages for unauthorized commercial use of his land. David called me 30 seconds after the ruling was posted online. "James, you won. Complete victory. Garrett has to remove all the cabins and pay you $2.5 million. I sat down. 120 days to remove them? That's 4 months. By April 2025, every cabin has to be gone, or you can have them demolished and bill the HOA for the cost. And the $2.5 million? Payment is due within 60 days. If Garrett doesn't pay, you can put a lien on HOA assets and force a sale. I looked out at the empty lake bed. What about his $40 million lawsuit? Dead, dismissed with prejudice. He can't refile. It's over. That same week, the cabin owner's class action lawsuit against the HOA moved forward. 73 of the 109 cabin owners joined the suit, claiming fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. They were seeking full refunds, approximately $14 million total, plus punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover the claims, arguing that fraud wasn't covered under the policy. Garrett and the HOA board were personally liable. By mid-December, the financial picture was catastrophic for Mountain Vista Estates HOA. They owed me $2.5 million. They faced $14 million in cabin owner refund demands. They had zero revenue from the cabins, and they had to pay for the removal of 109 structures within 4 months. David estimated total HOA liability at $20 to $25 million. The HOA's annual budget was $2.8 million, funded by dues from 240 homeowners. There was no way they could pay. On December 18th, Garrett resigned as HOA president. On December 22nd, the HOA filed for bankruptcy. And on December 30th, Garrett's attorney called David with a settlement offer. They want to negotiate, David told me. They're offering to remove all the cabins and pay you $1.5 million instead of $2.5 million if you agree to refill the lake once the cabins are gone. Countered at $3 million. Full removal, full cleanup, and they pay for an independent environmental inspection of my property to ensure no contamination from their construction. That's aggressive. They trespassed on my land for 3 years. They made millions off my property. They sued me for $40 million. I'm not feeling generous. 3 days later, they accepted. $3 million, full cabin removal, full site restoration, environmental inspection. And once the cabins were gone and my property was restored, I'd refill the lake. I signed the settlement on January 8, 2025. The cabins would be gone by April, and Lake Whitmore would return. The settlement agreement was signed on January 8, 2025. $3 million, full removal of all 109 cabins, complete site restoration, environmental inspection of my property to ensure no contamination from 3 years of construction and commercial operation. And once everything was removed and my land was restored, I would close the dam gates and refill the lake. David and I sat in his office, reviewing the final documents. This is a good outcome, James. You're getting more than the court awarded, plus full restoration. Garrett caved. He didn't have a choice. The HOA's bankrupt. The cabin owners are suing. He's personally liable for millions. This settlement is his only way out. He's still going to lose everything. He built a $12 million business on stolen land. He earned this. I signed the settlement agreement. Garrett's attorney, Marcus Westfield, had already signed on behalf of the HOA. The terms were clear. Payment, $3 million to be paid in 2 installments. $1.5 million within 30 days. Remaining $1.5 million upon completion of cabin removal and site restoration. Cabin removal. All 109 cabins to be demolished and removed within 120 days by May 8, 2025. Site restoration. All foundations, utilities, roads, docks, and structures to be removed. Land to be graded and reseeded. Property returned to natural state. Environmental inspection. Independent environmental engineer to inspect property and certify no contamination from construction materials, septic systems, or commercial operations. Lake refill. Upon completion of removal and inspection, James Whitmore agrees to close dam gates and refill Lake Whitmore. It was everything I'd wanted. The first payment, $1.5 million, arrived in my account on February 4, 2025. The money came from the HOA's Emergency Reserve Fund, which had been depleted to almost nothing. The HOA board had taken out a loan against the community clubhouse to cover the payment. Mountain Vista Estates was hemorrhaging money. Cabin removal began on February 10, 2025. I drove around to the eastern shore to watch the first day of demolition. A convoy of equipment rolled in at 7 a.m. Excavators, bulldozers, dump trucks, a crew of 20 workers. The demolition company, Summit Removal and Restoration, a firm out of Denver, had been hired by the HOA at a cost of $2.1 million. They started with the Welcome Center. An excavator with a hydraulic claw tore into the building, ripping away the roof, the walls, the support beams. Within 2 hours, the Welcome Center was reduced to rubble. Dump trucks hauled away the debris: wood, metal, drywall, fixtures. By the end of day 1, 3 cabins were demolished. I took photos, documented everything. It was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected, watching the structures that had been built illegally on my land get torn down piece by piece. The demolition continued for 4 months. The crew worked 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. They demolished cabins in sequential order, starting from the north end and working south. Each cabin took approximately 1 day to demolish and remove. The foundations, concrete slabs with embedded utilities, took another day to break up and haul away. By the end of February, 20 cabins were gone. By the end of March, 60 cabins were gone. The Eastern Shore was starting to look like a construction wasteland. Dirt, gravel, tire tracks, piles of broken concrete waiting to be hauled away. But the cabins were disappearing. I visited the site every week, walking through the demolition zone, checking progress. The lead foreman, a man named Ray Hutchins, recognized me after the 3rd visit. "You're Whitmore, right? The guy who owns the lake?" "That's right. Hell of a situation. We've demolished a lot of structures, but never 109 brand new cabins. These things were built solid. It's a shame. They were built on my land without permission." Ray nodded. "Yeah, I heard. HOA screwed up big time. I feel bad for the people who bought these cabins. They got scammed. They should have done their due diligence." "True, but still, a lot of people lost a lot of money." I didn't disagree. The cabin owners had been victims, but victims of the HOA's fraud, not mine. By mid-April, the demolition was nearly complete. 97 cabins were gone. Only 12 remained. The docks had been removed. The roads had been torn up. The utilities, water lines, electrical conduits, septic systems, had been excavated and removed. The land looked raw, scarred, but it was being restored. The environmental inspection happened on April 22nd. An engineer from Alpine Environmental Services spent 2 days walking the property, taking soil samples, testing for contamination from construction materials, septic leakage, or hazardous waste. His report came back clean. No contamination detected. Some soil compaction from heavy equipment, but that will resolve naturally over time. Recommend reseeding with native grasses and wildflowers. Property is safe for natural restoration. The final cabin was demolished on May 6, 2025, 2 days ahead of schedule. Ray Hutchins called me that evening. "Mr. Whitmore, we're done. All cabins removed, all foundations broken up and hauled away. Utilities excavated, site graded. We'll be reseeding tomorrow, and then we're off the property." "Good work, Ray. It's been a hell of a project. Never thought I'd be tearing down a whole resort." The reseeding happened over 3 days. The crew spread native grass seed and wildflower mix across 40 acres of disturbed land. By May 12th, Summit Removal and Restoration was gone. The Eastern Shore was empty, just dirt, grass seed, and tire tracks. But the cabins were gone, all 109 of them. $12 million in structures, demolished and hauled to landfills. David called me that afternoon. "James, the HOA just transferred the final $1.5 million. You're paid in full. $3 million total." I sat on my deck, looking at the empty lake bed. $3 million, my land restored, the trespassers removed, and now I could bring the lake back. But before I closed the dam gates, I wanted to understand what had happened to Garrett Pemberton. I asked David to fill me in. "Garrett's finished," David said. "He resigned as HOA president in December. The HOA board voted to remove him in January after the settlement. He's facing personal lawsuits from 73 cabin owners who claim he defrauded them. Total claims exceed $15 million. Will they collect? Probably not the full amount. Garrett's net worth is maybe $4 million. His house, some investments, business assets. He'll be forced to liquidate everything. He'll probably declare personal bankruptcy by the end of the year." "And the HOA? Mountain Vista Estates filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in March. They're restructuring. The 240 homeowners are being hit with special assessments, $8,000 per household, to cover the settlement, the demolition costs, and legal fees. A lot of them are furious. Some are talking about selling and leaving. What about the cabin owners? Most of them lost everything. A few are suing their attorneys for malpractice, claiming they should have been advised to do title searches before purchasing. But realistically, most of them will never recover their investments. It's a total loss. I thought about Patricia Moreno, the woman who testified about losing her retirement savings. $195,000, gone. It wasn't my fault, but it was tragic. Garrett destroyed a lot of lives, I said. He did, and now his life is destroyed too. On May 15th, I walked down to the dam control house. The gates had been fully open for 9 months. The lake had been drained since August 2024. The valley looked strange, empty, unnatural. 3 creek beds wound through the muddy basin, carrying water from the mountain streams. But there was no lake, just 800 acres of exposed lake bed, drying in the spring sun. I unlocked the control house and stepped inside. The gate wheel was exactly where I'd left it, locked in the fully open position. I put my hand on the wheel and turned it clockwise. The resistance was immediate. The gears engaged. The cables tightened. I turned the wheel slowly. 1 rotation, 2, 5, 10. After 20 rotations, the indicator showed the gates were fully closed. Water would start backing up behind the dam immediately. I locked the wheel in position and walked outside. I could already see the change. Water was pooling at the base of the dam instead of flowing through the spillways. The refill had begun. I called Martin Cross, my engineer friend. Martin, I just closed the gates. How long to refill? With 3 creeks at spring runoff levels, 6 to 8 months. You'll have a full lake by November or December. Good. James, I have to say, this whole thing was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant. You drained a lake to force a settlement. That's some next-level property defense. They gave me no choice. Still, impressive. I hung up and stood at the dam, watching the water start to rise. In 6 months, Lake Whitmore would be back. 800 acres of pristine mountain water, fish, wildlife, peace. Exactly the way it had been before Garrett Pemberton decided to build a resort on my land. By June, the water level had risen 20 feet. The creek beds were submerged. Small pools were forming in the basin. By August, the lake was halfway refilled. 200 acres of water, enough for kayaking, though not yet deep enough for powerboats. By October, the lake was 80% restored. 600 acres. The shoreline was recognizable again. And by December 1st, 2025, Lake Whitmore was back. 800 acres. 60 feet deep at the dam. Crystal clear water fed by 3 mountain streams. I launched my boat for the first time in over a year and motored out to the center of the lake. The eastern shore, where the 109 cabins had been, was empty. Just grass and wildflowers growing on the restored land. No cabins, no docks, no roads, no welcome center, just shoreline. The way it had been for 60 years before Garrett built his resort. I cut the engine and sat in silence, drifting on the water. Garrett Pemberton had lost everything. His position as HOA president, his wealth, his reputation. He faced $15 million in lawsuits and personal bankruptcy. The Mountain Vista Estates HOA was bankrupt, forcing 240 homeowners to pay thousands in special assessments. 73 cabin owners had lost their investments, over $14 million collectively. And I had my lake back, plus $3 million. It wasn't about the money. It was about property rights. Garrett had thought he could build on my land, ignore my ownership, and bully me into submission. He'd been wrong. I drained a lake, demolished a resort, and bankrupted an HOA, all without breaking a single law. Because the lake was mine, the dam was mine, the land was mine, and nobody builds on my property without permission. 1 year after I drained Lake Whitmore, I was fishing in the exact spot where cabin number 47 used to stand. It was December 15th, 2025. The lake had been fully refilled for 2 weeks. 800 acres of crystal clear water, 60 feet deep at the dam, fed by 3 mountain streams. I'd caught 2 rainbow trout in the past hour, both decent size. I released them and cast my line again. The eastern shore, where 109 vacation cabins had sat for nearly 3 years, was pristine. Native grasses had grown in thick over the summer and fall. Wildflowers dotted the hillside. A few young aspens were sprouting naturally. You'd never know there had been a $12 million resort there. No cabins, no docks, no roads, no parking lots, no welcome center with a sign advertising $500 per night, luxury lakefront getaways. Just shoreline, trees, wildlife. The way it had been before Garrett Pemberton decided my property was his business opportunity. My phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. Final settlement payment cleared. All legal matters closed. Congratulations, James. You won. I smiled and put the phone away. The past 18 months had been exhausting. The discovery, the confrontation, the decision to drain the lake, the lawsuits, the settlement, the demolition, the restoration. But it was over. I'd paid $3 million in legal fees and expenses over the course of the battle. But I'd received $3 million in settlement payments, net zero on the financials. Except I'd also kept my property, removed 109 trespassing structures, and sent a clear message that you don't build on James Whitmore's land without permission. The lake had been drained for 9 months, August 2024 through May 2025. Then 6 months to refill, May through November 2025. 15 months total that Lake Whitmore had been out of commission. It had been worth it. A boat motor hummed in the distance. I turned and saw a small fishing boat approaching from the north shore. It was Mike Henderson, one of the few neighbors who lived on the far side of my property. We'd met occasionally over the years at the general store in town. He owned 200 acres adjacent to my northern boundary. Mike pulled his boat alongside mine and cut the engine. "James, good to see you out here. Lake looks beautiful. It's good to have it back." I bet. That was quite a year. The whole county was talking about it. I'm sure they were. Mike cast his line and let it settle. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Was it worth it? I mean, draining the whole lake, all the lawsuits, all the drama, just to get rid of those cabins? You could have just sued them, settled for some cash, and moved on." I reeled in my line and cast again, watching the lure arc through the air and land softly on the water. "They built 109 cabins on my land, Mike. Not 1 or 2, 109. A full commercial resort. They made millions in revenue for 3 years using my property. And when I confronted them, they laughed at me, told me to take it up with the county, threatened to tie me up in court for years." Mike nodded, listening. "So I removed the lake," I continued. "I didn't touch their cabins. I didn't sabotage their business. I just operated my dam the way I'm legally allowed to operate it. And without the lake, their lakefront cabins became worthless. Pretty calculated move. It was the only move that made sense. If I'd sued, we'd still be in court 3 years from now. Garrett would have kept making money off my land the whole time. Instead, I ended it in 9 months. They removed the cabins. I got $3 million. My property's restored. And I have my lake back." Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. "When you put it that way, yeah, it was worth it." Damn right it was. We fished in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mike asked, "What happened to Garrett? I heard he left town." "He did. Declared personal bankruptcy in August. Lost his house, his cars, his investments. The cabin owners sued him for fraud. 73 separate lawsuits. He settled most of them for pennies on the dollar. Last I heard, he moved to Nevada, working for someone else's real estate company now. He went from HOA president with a $12 million resort to bankrupt and working for someone else? That's what happens when you build your fortune on stolen land." Mike shook his head. "And the HOA, Mountain Vista Estates? Bankrupt. They restructured, but it cost every homeowner $8,000 in special assessments. A lot of them are furious. Some sold their houses and left. The HOA is still functional, but barely. New board, new management company, new rules about financial oversight. What about the people who bought the cabins? The investors?" That question was harder. Most of them lost everything. Life savings in some cases. Retirement funds. One woman invested $195,000. Gone. A couple in their 30s put down $210,000, thinking it would generate rental income for the next 20 years. Gone. They're suing the HOA, suing Garrett, suing each other. But realistically, they'll never recover the money. Mike frowned. That's rough. They were victims too. But they were victims of Garrett's fraud, not mine. They bought property without doing title searches, without verifying ownership, without checking if the land was actually legal to build on. That's on them. Still tough. It is, but I didn't build on their property. Garrett built on mine. If they have a problem with losing their investments, they should take it up with the guy who sold them illegal cabins, not the guy who owns the land. Mike nodded. Fair point. A fish hit my line. I set the hook and reeled it in. A nice brown trout, maybe 14 inches. I held it up, admired it, and released it back into the water. Good fish, Mike said. Lake's healthy. Ecosystem bounced back fast once the water returned. How long did it take to refill? 6 months. I closed the gates in May. By November, it was full. Spring runoff this year was strong, so that helped. And you're just back to normal now? Like nothing happened? I looked around the lake. The mountains rising in the distance, the forest along the shoreline, the clear water reflecting the winter sky. Better than normal. The lake's restored. My property's protected. And everyone in this county knows that if you build on James Whitmore's land without permission, you're going to lose everything. Mike laughed. You made an example out of Garrett. I defended my property rights. If that made an example, so be it. We fished for another hour. Mike caught 2 trout. I caught 1 more. As the sun started to dip behind the western ridge, Mike fired up his boat engine. Good talking to you, James. Glad the lake's back. Me too. He motored away toward the north shore, and I was alone again. I sat in my boat, drifting slowly, watching the light change on the water. 18 months ago, I'd come home from Oregon and found 109 cabins built on my land, a resort operating without my permission. A man who thought he could steal my property and get away with it. I'd spent 16 years maintaining this lake, paying taxes, keeping the dam operational, preserving the wilderness, and in 8 months while I was helping my daughter with her newborn, someone had tried to take it from me. But I'd fought back, not with violence, not with sabotage, just with the simple legal operation of my dam. I'd opened the gates, drained the lake, made Garrett's $12 million investment worthless. And then I'd waited while his business collapsed, waited while the lawsuits piled up, waited while he realized he had no choice but to remove every cabin and pay me $3 million. Patience, strategy, and an understanding of property law. That's all it took. I motored back to my cabin as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink over the mountains. My dock was exactly where it had always been, on the north shore, private, peaceful. I tied up the boat and walked up to my cabin. Inside, I made dinner, grilled trout with wild rice and roasted vegetables, poured a glass of whiskey, sat on my deck as darkness settled over the lake. The stars came out, thousands of them, sharp and bright in the thin mountain air. I thought about Garrett Pemberton, living in Nevada, bankrupt, working for someone else. I thought about the 109 cabin owners who'd lost their investments. I thought about the Mountain Vista Estates homeowners, paying $8,000 special assessments because their HOA president committed fraud. A lot of people had suffered because of Garrett's greed and arrogance, but I wasn't one of them. I had my lake back, my property was protected, and I'd proven that property rights still mean something. You can't just build on someone else's land and expect to keep it. You can't ignore ownership and think you're untouchable. And you definitely can't threaten to bury someone in lawsuits when they own the dam that creates the lake your entire business depends on. Garrett had learned that lesson the hard way, and so had 109 cabin owners, and so had an entire HOA. I finished my whiskey and went inside. The lake was back, the trespassers were gone, and life was peaceful again, exactly the way I liked it. Some people might say I was harsh, that I could have negotiated, that I could have found a compromise. But those people don't understand property rights. You don't compromise with trespassers. You don't negotiate with people who steal your land and refuse to leave. You defend what's yours. And if that means draining a lake to remove 109 illegal cabins, so be it. I'd do it again tomorrow if I had to, because this is my land, my dam, my lake, and nobody builds here without my permission.